Sunday morning. Could somebody pick that up for me over there? It's Sunday morning, and it's getting close to that time of the year again, Xmass season, and or some people call it Christmas, and then they've disguised it by dropping an S on it and putting the two words together and calling it Christmas. It's actually Xmass, and when I was a kid down in Texas back in 1950, 51, 52, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, the preachers would get real upset at people putting Xmass sale on some department store, and they hated Xmass, and they said, "Oh, it's not X. Get the X out of Christmas and put Jesus back in." Jesus never was in Christmas. It was always been Xmass. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, Constantine was the world ruler, the leader of all the world, and he was absolute monarch of the world in around 312 actually, 312 AD, and he was trying to amalgamate Christianity, and paganism. The reason he was doing this is because that he was losing the empire he thought he was going to lose the empire to a bunch of marauding hordes. I call them terrorists, and they were the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths. Visigoths were the ones that really put him on the spot. You had the Goths were divided into two families. The Goths were divided into two families, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. And the Visigoths were more barbaric. They were one of the most barbaric of all the tribes. These were first cousins, and they had divided some time before. And the Ostrogoths were not necessarily totally peaceful, but they were more peaceful than the Visigoths. And when you have the and the reason I'm teaching on this is what the prophecy of Israel is about all through the Old Testament. When you get into Baal and the Grove, Shemash, Molech, or you get into and these are all male deities. These are sun gods, and they're sun gods in different city states. You had Tammuz, all the male deities of the Greek world, of the Greek pantheon of gods, and of the Roman god system. All of them the males were sun gods, or they were fire gods. The fire represented the sun upon the earth, and the female deities were the tree goddesses. And it all began at Babel under Nimrod, and Nimrod was the grandson. They began under Nimrod, and Nimrod came out of his grandfather was Ham, and Ham was one of the sons of Noah. And Ham had to marry one of the descendants of Cain, which were idolatrous tree and sun worshippers. So it came out of the ark, and they started this thing all over again. Well, Baal in the Grove is what Israel served all through the Old Testament. They served Baal in the Grove. They were a nation for 500 years, and we're going through their history as a nation from around 1096 BC. That's about the time King Saul began to rule in Israel. Now, that's in the 8th. It starts in the 8th and 9th chapter of 1 Samuel, where the people said, "Give us a man king," when God was their king. Well, God says, "I'll pick one out," and he gave him Saul. He's of the wrong tribe. He's of the tribe of Benjamin. God's king has to come out of Judah. So God puts it in the heart of Saul. Well, excuse me a minute. My microphone is not cooperating. Well, hold on. I may have to get somebody up here. That ain't working. Hold on. One second here. I guess that's better. Think so. Okay. Maybe. If it don't work, I'll stop again. All right. Anyway, so they were a nation under kings for approximately 500 years. And the promise had been given to Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob back in the 17th chapter of Genesis and the 28th chapter of Genesis, that this land would go to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants through a particular line. Of course, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. He had 12 sons, and these 12 sons became the nation. And then they were carried off. They were actually sold into bondage. When Joseph was sold into bondage, that was the 11th son of Jacob, and they were sold into bondage, and they were there in bondage for 400 years, and then they were brought out of bondage 40 years in the wilderness, and then they were about 300 years under judges, and then they were under kings for about 500 years. Well, all the time they were under kings, they kept going after these idol gods, and this is the same system that Constantine, and how do you know it's the same system that Constantine brought into the church and renamed Christ's Mass? The way you know this is Revelation 17 and 5 says that Babylon was the mothered and nurtured all harlotry, porneia, or all idolatry. Now, I believe the Bible when it says that. I believe that Babylon mothered it all, so you can trace every god in the world. Every god will go back to Babylon, and they will all be sun and tree. Now, even when you read Mr. Strong, or you read some of these historians, they'll say, well, we can trace these tree goddesses back, but we can't trace, and I was reading one of my books yesterday, said, well, we can't trace the Irish gods over to Rome. Yes, you can. You can trace them back because the Bible says Babylon mothered it all. And when you get into the Irish gods of Samhain or Halloween, it has a lot of the same culture. They're passing their children through the fire, and Israel was passing their children to the fire. I think that makes them close kin, doesn't it? And the Irish are the people that celebrated Samhain, Samhain, and Samhain was one of the fire holidays of the ancient world. It was of course, as we keep saying, the swastika was the wheel of the year, and you had 8 points on the swastika, and that was nothing but the Big Dipper. In the center of the swastika is the North Star. Like we've said so many times, if the North Star is directly above the earth, and you have the Big Dipper, you have the Big Dipper in its 4 phases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you have over here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and over here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when you connect those, what you've got is the wheel of the year, or the swastika, and there's 7 stars in the Big Dipper, and when you go, that was called the wheel of the year, and they said someone had to be up there turning the wheel, and they said the Queen of Heaven, and Israel worshiped the Queen of Heaven, and there's a Queen of Heaven in the Roman Catholic Church. And when you take all these cultures, they're all so intermixed, but they all have something in common, and we know they come from the same source, and the Bible says they come from the same source. They came from the beginning of Babylon, and Babylon began at Babel in Genesis, the 11th chapter, when they said, let us build us a city and a tower, and let us make us a name. This is our doctrine. They wanted an ethnic identity. They wanted to identify themselves and say, we want to stand out. When you build cities, when you build things to rule over men, what